I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Well, the marching orders have gone out. Yes. In order for Joe Biden to have any chance at beating Donald Trump in this year's election, Christians have to be effectively neutered and convinced to stay home and not vote for the former president. We are hearing more and more about the evils of Christian nationalism. So, what is Christian nationalism exactly? Well, in an opinion piece by David French of the New York Times, he says, if you're alarmed by the rise of Christian nationalism, the single worst thing you can do is define it too broadly. If you define it too broadly, then you're telling millions of ordinary churchgoing citizens that the importation of their religious values into the public square somehow places them in the same camp or on the same side as actual Christian supremacists. Oh, so we're now tying Christian nationalism to Christian supremacy somehow. All right. Also, the illiberal authoritarians who want to remake America in their own fundamentalist image. Ooh, this ought to be good then, right? Enter the new feature-length documentary, God and Country, which examines the role of Christian nationalism in American politics. Now, he's talking about the Rob Reiner documentary that was put together. Rob Reiner, obviously a very flaming liberal, and he's done a number of things that, they're just very anti-Christian, very anti-conservative type stuff. And French goes on here to talk about how he was picked to be in the documentary and yada yada. Says to understand what Christian nationalism is, he says, it's important to understand what it is not. It is not Christian nationalism. If a person's political views are shaped by individuals' Christian faith. Okay, well, that's good. In fact, many of Americans' most important social movements have been infused with Christian theology and Christian activism. That's true. Many of our nation's abolitionists thundered their condemnations of slavery from northern pulpits. True. The civil rights movement wasn't exclusively Christian by any means, but it was pervasively Christian. Martin Luther King Jr. was, of course, a Baptist minister. All right, so we're seeing real nuggets of truth here. But then he goes on, he says, anyone may disagree with Christian arguments around civil rights, immigration, abortion, religious liberty, or any other point of political conflict. Christians disagree with one another on these topics all the time. But it is no more illegitimate or dangerous for a believer to bring her worldview into public debate than it is for a secular person to bring his own secular moral reasoning into politics. In fact, he says, I have learned from faiths other than my own, and our public square would be impoverished without access to the thoughts and ideas of Americans of faith. Okay. But again, here we go. The problem with Christian nationalism isn't with Christian participation in politics, but rather the belief that there should be a Christian primacy in politics and law. It can manifest itself through ideology, identity, and emotion. And if it were to take hold, it would both upend our Constitution and fracture our society. Okay, here we go. So basically, he's saying there's nothing wrong with Christians participating in politics as long as they're not winning or anybody's listening to them. He says the sociologists Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead define Christian nationalism as a culture framework that blurs distinctions between Christian identity and American identity. Okay. Viewing the two as closely related and seeking to enhance and preserve their union. Okay, I would like to hear the definitions of those, but anyway, you can't you can't define something like Christian nationalism by using Christian nationalism in the definition. But anyway, the author and pastor Matthew McCullough defines Christian nationalism as, quote, an understanding of American identity and significance held by Christians, whether the nation is a central actor in the world historical purposes of the Christian God. So he's basically just saying that if you think God has a hand in our nation, then you're a Christian nationalist. In 2022, he goes on to say, a coalition of right-wing writers and leaders published a document called National Conservatism, a Statement of Principles. In its section on God and public religion states, quote, where a Christian majority exists, public life should be rooted in Christianity and its moral vision, which should be honored by the state and other institutions, both public and private. Now, he says here, that's an extraordinary and ominous ideological statement, one that would immediately relegate non-Christians to second-class status. I didn't see that anywhere in there. Didn't see that at all. But he says it's utterly contrary to the First Amendment and would impose a form of compelled deference to Christianity on both religious minorities and non-religious. But Christian nationalism isn't just rooted in ideology, he says. It's also deeply rooted in identity, the belief that Christians should rule. This is the heart of the Seven Mountain Mandate, a dominionist movement emerging from American Pentecostalism that is, put bluntly, he says, Christian identity politics on steroids. Paula White, he goes on to say that Paula White is Donald Trump's closest spiritual advisor, and she's one of these adherents. And Tom Parker, too, he's on the Alabama. He's the chief justice there in Alabama, and he was one of those that voted in favor of the IVF decision, so he must be bad. He says the movement holds that Christians are called to rule 7 key societal institutions: the family, the church, education, the media, the arts, businesses, and the government. One doesn't have to go all the way into Seven Mountain theology, though, to find examples of Christian identity politics. The use of Christianity as an unofficial but necessary qualification for office is a routine part of politics in most church-going parts of America. Moreover, one of the common Red America arguments for Trump is that he might not be devout himself, but he'll place lots of Christians in government. Okay, let's stop here for a second. To say that if I, as a Christian, see somebody that is running for office and they're a Christian, that is wrong if I vote for them because I see that as a good thing, well, come on. Everybody does that. That is not unusual. LGBTQ people, if they see somebody who is flying the rainbow flag, they're more likely to vote for that person, right? So why is it not acceptable for a Christian to do that? It says, but what is Christian identity politics but another form of Christian supremacy? Oh, so if I vote for another Christian, I'm engaging in Christian supremacy. How does Christian identity alone make any person a better candidate for office? Well, I can tell you, pick me. I'm raising my hand. Because if you truly are a Christian, which is someone who is striving to be like Christ, then you're going to exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. Those fruits of the Spirit are all good things. Go look them up in the Bible. There's not a single one of them that's not good. And if I am striving to be like Christ and to demonstrate fruits of the Spirit and to be a good person and to then garner wisdom through my Creator, how is that not at least something that says that I might be better in office. But he goes on, he says, after all, many of the worst actors in America politics are professed believers. Scandal and corruption are more pervasive in the church. That when people say, I'm a Christian, it tells me almost nothing about their wisdom and virtue. Well, that's because you're not a Christian. He says, finally, we can't forget the intense emotion of Christian nationalism. Most believers don't follow ideological and theological arguments particularly closely. In the words of the historian Thomas Kidd, quote, actual Christian nationalism is a more visceral reaction than a rational, chosen stance. He says, it is tied, in other words, to visceral sense that the fate of the church is closely tied to the outcome of any given political race. Again, how can you say that this is any different amongst non-Christians? You can't say this is tied to Christian nationalism. It's not. Okay? It seems like everybody on their side of the fence thinks that the next election is either going to doom the country or not. He says that fervor can make believers gullible and potentially even dangerous. It's good versus evil dynamic can make Christians believe that their potential political opponents are capable of anything, including stealing an election. Yeah. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton or a number of candidates down in Georgia that still say that the race was taken away from them, that they were the ones that actually won it, but it was stolen from them. I mean, come on. This is absolutely outrageous. He goes on to talk about January 6th and anyway. Committed Christian nationalists represent only 10% of the population, according to a 2023 PRRI Brookings Christian Nationalism Survey. Ought to be fun. But even members of a minority that small can gain outsized power when they fold themselves into a larger Christian electorate, casting themselves as, quote, just like you. Oh, Christian nationalists aren't just like you? That's why we cannot conflate Christian activism with Christian nationalism. One can welcome Christian participation in public square while resisting domination from any faith or creed. Okay, so here it is again, and that's where he ends it. So, you again, if you're a Christian, that's fine. You can be even a Christian nationalist, and you can hold ideas and opinions when it comes to political goings on, but just don't be the majority. Don't just don't hold any power when it comes to political type things. Absolutely ridiculous. But these type of things are written and put out there in order to make Christians look like they're some sort of white supremacists. But let's look at that. Let's look at that Brookings, that PRRI Brookings Christian Nationalism Survey, because I think it's going to tell you a little bit about what they're trying to do here. In fact, just read the introduction here. I'm going to read the introduction to it. It says, the rising influence of Christian nationalism in some segments of American politics poses a major threat to the health of our democracy. Increasingly, the major battle lines of the cultural war are being drawn between a right animated by a Christian nationalist worldview and Americans who embrace the country's growing racial and religious diversity. This new survey of more than 6,000 Americans takes a closer look at the underpinnings of Christian nationalism, providing new measures to estimate the proportion of Americans who adhere to and reject Christian nationalist ideology. The survey also examines how Christian nationalists views intersect with white identity, anti-black segment, support of patriarchy, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiments, anti-immigrant attitudes, authoritarianism, and support for violence. If you're a Christian, you're going to be supporting violence. Additionally, the survey explores the influential Christian nationalism as within our two primary political parties and majority religious subgroups, and what this reveals about the state of American democracy and the health of our society. All right. So it goes on to do this. It says, to measure Christian nationalism, the survey included a battery of 5 questions. So let's go through these 5 questions that they asked everybody to see if you were a Christian nationalist, okay? One of those dirty, evil Christian nationalists. Number 1, the U.S. government, and see what you're supposed to do here, you're supposed to say that you completely agree, mostly disagree, or completely disagree. So one of the 4 things here to these 5 questions. Number 1, the U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Well, I wouldn't agree with that, because the U.S. government shouldn't declare that. Our Constitution actually says that we have freedom of religion, that the government is not to expressly say that one religion is this country's main religion. Okay, so you can't say that the U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Number 2, U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. Well, yeah, and number 1, they are for the most part, and that's a good thing, because that's where you get morals from. What else would you base them off of? I mean, laws have to be based on something. A loving, just God, and what He has to say seems to be a really good thing to base them off of, right? Number 3, if the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. Well, our country is blessed by God, and we have been protected by God. And if we move away from Him, yeah, we could very easily not have a country anymore. Take a look at other countries, for example, throughout history, that have gotten away from God and suddenly aren't in existence anymore. All right, number 4. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. I mean, there's a lot of people that think that. That's not really a Christian thing. There's a lot of Americans that say, oh, I'm a Christian because I'm American. I'm not sure how many people say that I'm a Christian because I'm American, or I'm an American because I'm Christian. I haven't heard that before. But number 5, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of Christian society. Okay, so here's a question that absolutely begs for definition. I mean, what does that mean? That God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society? People could define that differently. Yeah, I mean, if all areas, like for instance, education, for instance, if more Christians were participating in public education, we wouldn't see the terrible things that are happening in public education today. So yeah, I mean, it's a good thing when Christians dominate, as they say, or exercise dominion over different areas of society. And when Christians pull out of those areas, that's when really things start going to pot. And that's just historical. And so it says that there's results here. If you're an adherent, if you overwhelmingly agree with these things, you're a sympathizer. If you disagree sometimes with these things, and you're a skeptic or a rejector, type conversely. And it says to the introduction of understanding the threat of white Christian nationalism. This is part of the survey. It says here, the introduction is the rising influence of Christian nationalism has some segments of Christian politics poses a major threat to the health of our democracy. Increasingly, the battle lines of the culture are being drawn between a right animated by Christian nationalism and worldview of Americans who embrace the country's growing racial and religious diversity. That just, anyway, it tells you the bias in which they are doing things here. Now, it says the answers across all 5 questions are highly correlated. So, in other words, they take these answers and they spit them out to where you are considered one of those 4 different categories of adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, or rejectors. So, it says, which Americans are most supportive of Christian nationalism? Well, it says there's a religious identity. White evangelical Protestants are more supportive of Christian nationalism than any other group surveyed. Nearly 2/3 of the white evangelical Protestants qualify as either Christian nationalism sympathizers or adherents, 35% to 29%. Even Protestants of color actually come in second there. Identifying as evangelical or born again is positively collaborated with holding Christian nationalist views across racial and ethnic lines. So it's really interesting that they're saying if you're a born again Christian, then you're really likely to be a Christian nationalist. Christians who identify as born again or evangelical are each about 5 times as likely to be Christian nationalism adherents as members of the same racial or ethnic groups who identify as Christian but not evangelical. So it's those evil evangelicals. Religious practice. Americans who lean toward supporting Christian nationalism are not, as some have theorized, Christians in name only. So they're saying that to use the excuse that they're not really Christians if they're Christian nationalists. No. You're definitely more likely if you're a white evangelical born again Christian to be this evil Christian nationalist. Partnership is closely linked to Christian nationalist views. Most Republicans qualify as either Christian nationalism sympathizers or adherents. So yeah, now we're going to bring in the Republican Party and say, oh, wow, you nasty, evil Republicans, you're Christian nationalists. Now, why are they using Christian nationalism so much? You see this, Christian nationalism. Well, it's because the perception of the term Christian nationalism is definitely not one that's in a positive light. It says that more than 1/3 of Americans, 35%, say that they have not heard the term of Christian nationalism, but the term is decisively negative and it has a negative connotation among those who have been exposed to it. Americans are more than twice as likely to uphold an unfavorable view of the term than to hold a favorable view of it. So obviously, if you're not a Christian and you are liberal and that type of thing, then throwing this Christian nationalism thing out there helps your cause. This is also interesting too. It says the survey asks Americans about religious pluralism by asking them to choose between 2 contrasting statements. Number 1, I would prefer the U.S. to be a nation made up of people belonging to a wide variety of religions. Or number 2, I would prefer the U.S. to be a nation primarily made up of people who follow the Christian faith. Well, yeah, duh. I mean, if I'm a Christian and I believe in the Christian faith and I believe in its tenets and I believe in the Bible, then why in the world would I say, well, but it's really cool when other people that are that don't believe in my faith, when they're a part of my country and they're going to go to hell. I would love for them to do that. No, I would love for people to share in my faith because obviously my faith is real. It's real to me. We've gone over this on the podcast about why Christianity is real. But yes, of course, I'm going to want the nation that I live in to be predominantly Christian. But it says only about 1/3 of Americans disagree with white supremacy is still a major problem in the USA today, compared to 65% who agree. However, Majorities of Christian nationalism sympathizers and adherents disagree that white supremacy remains a problem. Okay, show me where it's a problem. I would love for you to do that. It also talks about how, Christian nationalists supported U.S. Capitol takeover on January 6th of 2021 and da-da-da. Yeah, historically, I love this right here too. And we'll conclude with this survey on this. It says, historically, the ideology of Christian nationalism has been linked to a dominant white Anglo-Saxon Protestant cultural identity. Whew, mouthful. A connection that is reflected in a number of attitudinal patterns related to religious pluralism, race, and immigration. Come on. It's throwing all of the buzzwords out there, right? It's telling you Christian nationalism is bad. Okay? And so all of this we're seeing more and more, and I thought Candace Owens put it really well. She writes for the Daily Wire. Obviously, she has a show on there. You can go watch that show. But I like how she put it. It says, a publication which will remain nameless used to cover me quite frequently, and recently and abruptly it stopped. And she goes into, well, why did they stop? Because they have now classified her as a Christian nationalism. She says, now I'm a proud Christian, but I thought that it was a bit strange that a media hit was put on me for the sole reason of being a Christian, because my show's not overtly Christian. She says, but maybe it should be. We don't pray on the air, really, but maybe we should. And she says, regardless, I'm not sure I have any problem with either of those terms, Christian or nationalism. She says, I definitely consider myself to be a nationalist, and I'm also a Christian. However, they're saying it in a much more sinister way. If you're paying attention, Christian nationalist is everywhere as of late. Suddenly, Christianity is being smeared, labeled, and attacked. It is being presented in the same vein as white supremacy. In February alone, major media outlets published a number of different surveys and things, and she goes down through just 4 of them, and they all came in just the last month. The topic is also getting the Hollywood spin, and she goes into how the Rob Reiner documentary and how obviously Hollywood has to chase after the things that the liberals put out there. And she says now I'm not sure, when you consider the myriad of issues facing our country today, what you're really concerned about is that there might be some Christians who are also in love with our country. They are Christian nationalists. And when you see drug dealers, illegal immigrants, crime rates, gang violence, I'm not sure you're thinking it's the Christians we should be afraid of. She says, that's just an absurd idea. I believe this is a further attempt to divide and brainwash Christians, which is something that has gone on for decades. And that is true, isn't it? I mean, this is really what it boils down to, is that they are trying to divide. They're trying to divide the church. And it is spiritual warfare. And she says, it seems that every time we get a glimpse of truth and forces unite and more evil occurs. She says, I cannot imagine the pressure that people like Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber right now is, married somebody. He started to settle down. He's actually going to church. And the pressure that Hollywood and these forces put on people who are looking into their faith, they're looking into becoming Christians and things like that. What pressure that is being placed upon them, particularly when they start throwing out all this stuff about Christian nationalism. She says, pay attention, pray, and encourage each other. If we can unite in our faith, we can conquer more evil together than we can alone. And that's true. I would say that is really the reality of all this. It is evil's attempt to divide the church and scare it to not get involved with those things around it. The Bible tells us that we're supposed to have an influence on society around us. But this is an attempt to scare us to not do that. And it is an attempt to just shut us up. And I don't know. Will it work on you? I would love to hear it. You can always communicate that through our website, uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.